Welcome to Jackie's Literary Corner. I am Jackie. So first, before I start, this is going to be another one of my videos where I might get interrupted via text, so I'm going to ignore them, but you're probably going to hear the ding sound. That's because right before I started filming, I was texting a couple people, so sorry about that. So this is not going to be an update video. I will update. I don't know if I'm going to update today or not about how my reading is going, because I know I've done it before where it's only been a couple days since my last update, but I always try to wait a little while. But then I feel guilty. I haven't given you guys a video lately, so we will see. But this video is actually something that I just started thinking about. And I recently, and it was motivated by a new booktuber I started watching. His name's Randy Ray, and he's the Texan booktuber. He seems like a cool guy. Kind of reminds me of Steve Donahue, and he has, mentioned being a fan of Steve's. He even did a video where he brought him up as a well-read person, which I agree. But that man reads so much. I'm impressed how much, and I know that I choose my time to not read 24/7, but he does read a lot, except for, when he's walking his adorable little dog and his little Frida, who's so cute. She always pops up in Steve's videos, and then occasionally in his book braille visits. But I choose not to read all the time. Sometimes I'm watching, binging YouTube videos, or like watching movies or TV shows, and then or like going to the bookstore and or spending time with my family. Eating meals and sleeping, of course, and But anyway, the Randy Ray's video was one of the videos he made was talking about rereads and the importance of rereads. And I do believe in the value of rereading. I'm one of those people who does. I have reread books before. But his video kind of made me feel a little guilty because I don't reread a lot. Because I'm worried, I'm always trying to make sure I read all the books because I'm an avid book buyer. So I'm always trying to make sure I read the books that I have bought. Or trying to assure people who have given me books that I've read, I'm going to read their books. Maybe not right away all the time. Although I try to I'm trying to more and more get into the habit of reading them right away. So I don't, so that I can assure them I wanted to read those books. I'm excited to read them, and and because of that, I'm like, I don't know if I should reread right now, because reread any of my books, because I need to reread all these books that I've had for a while on my shelf, or books that I've received as gifts, and so, but I have reread a handful of books. Like, I've reread Jane Eyre multiple times. Like, I want to say like 3 or 4 times, because it was one of my first, well, I don't know if it will be my first classic or not, but it was one of the ones that kind of stayed with me that I remember, and I feel like it was my first. I read that when I was 16 the first time, so around the time, and it wasn't too long. I think what motivated me to finally read it was because the 2011 movie was going to be coming out, I believe. So I was like, let me read the book. And I finally read it. And then since then, I've read it 2 more times. And I keep saying I'm going to read it again for a 4th time, but I haven't done it. Because all of a sudden I'll get sidetracked by all my other books that I've had. Like whether I've just purchased some, or books that all of a sudden I feel inspired to read. Because I'm somewhat of a mood reader. Although I don't go on whims that often. I don't always go on whims all the time, but I do consider myself a mood reader. And Then I've also reread The Great Gatsby. I read it in high school and I read it after high school twice. And probably one of those times again was a situation where the newer adaptation with Leo DiCaprio, um, Tom Maguire, and I cannot remember the actress's name when that one came out. Liz, I think. Well, I remember Lizzie Caplan was the one who played Jordan, but I'm trying to think of the one who played Daisy. I can't think of her name. I can picture her, but I cannot remember her name. And so I'm sure in that case, and I've read The Hobbit multiple times because that is a lot easier and will take less time than read Lord of the Rings, which I just finished reading physically for the first time a few days ago. And I did a whole video on it and everything. And now, but I consider that a reread because since I did listen to it on audiobook. So no, I did not use my eye muscles, but I did use my hearing muscles and I listened to it. I mean, I do get what people say when they say that you're using different muscles, and sometimes the way you take in the information is very different from when you're physically reading the words on the page yourself. I understand that, but I still, I still believe it counts as reading because you're still consuming the story. So that's technically reading. I mean, no, you're not doing the physical act of the reading, but I think as long as you're consuming the story and hearing the words and taking in what the premise and everything, taking the story, then I think it counts. And yes, I know you can make the case of movies. Actually, Randy Ray talked about this, that it's just you can't, you don't count movies as reading. But then again, a movie isn't the book. It's an adaptation of the book, interpretation of the book. It's taking the events of the book and turning it into a script. And you're not the one reading the script, the actors are reading the script. But the audiobook is someone reading the physical book. You're someone who is physically reading the book. So again, it counts. I'm gonna stop talking about that because I could dangerously get into rant territory with that one. But I've listened to it, so I consider that something I've reread, even though I didn't physically read the book. I've only physically read the book once. I still consume the story, and I'm trying to think of another reread. I'm trying to think of what else I've reread. I can't think of, but I do believe there are other books I reread. Oh, I think I've read Treasure Island. I think I've read that twice now. And I've read twice, The Catcher in the Rye. Some of the books I've read in school, Catcher in the Rye being one of those books I've read more than once. At least twice. I read in school and then I read it again. That's what I mean. So, that includes Fahrenheit 451 as well. And that's oftentimes that is my motivation, is that there's books that I read a long time ago that I want to reread and see how I feel about it. And especially if they're books I read in school, and determine that not a lot of those, the two that comes to mind is Catcher in the Rye and Fahrenheit. And I did attempt Brave New World, but I couldn't get into the story this time around. I wasn't motivated to read it. I wasn't interested, and I gotta admit, I was kind of bored. I'm trying to think of I'm sure there are other classic books that I reread, but I just can't think of them. And one of the things he talks, I don't know if it was something that he got it, he agreed with someone that said this, or if he was saying it himself, but he did say, how can you determine if a book is your favorite if you've only read it once? And that kind of got me guilty too, feeling a little guilty myself, because there are books that I claim are my favorites, like The Count of Monte Cristo, and I've only read it once. Granted, that's a super long one, just like with It as well, which is one that I claim as a favorite, but I haven't reread it. And I know I can do whatever I want. They're not dictating my reading life. And if I think it's my favorite, then yes, it can be my favorite, even if I've only read it once. I'm well aware of that. So I don't need anyone to remind me, don't let someone, this booktuber that I just started following, dictate how I feel about a book. I know that, but I still feel like, yeah, it makes sense that, rereading a book could potentially make it official. Because how can I know that these books are favorites when I've only read it once? Because I'm just going by my first emotional reaction when reading it. Like, because especially with the really long books like It and The Count, where there are books that are so much is in the story, there's so many details and so much information. It's like, how can I know for sure when I've only read it once? Because when you read it once, yeah, it's just for, you're experiencing the story for the first time, and you're not going to catch everything. You're not going to, yeah, you're going to have this emotional reaction to it the first time around, whether it's positive or negative reaction, but you're going to miss something. You're just going by your initial reaction, your initial feelings. And yeah, you can take the time to think about it, but even then, you're not going to get everything about a book, especially when it's a super long book, unless you read it more than once. Which is the problem, is that those books take me so long to read that I'm thinking, oh, maybe I shouldn't. Yeah, I hate to use this word, but when it comes to reading, but waste my time when I have all these other books I have to read. And I love reading, so it's not like I don't mean it as it's a chore or anything, but it's just like, I bought them, I spent the money on them, or in the rare occasion I borrowed them from the library, so I need to read them. And I'm not saying, and again, I'm not saying it's a chore, but I feel like it. Why am I just gonna let them sit there when I spent the money on them? So this year I want to try to reread more, and even if it's a super long one, because I just finished my first reread of Lord of the Rings, and it took me a little over a month. And like, I did start it at the end of December, around Christmas, New Year's time, and then I read the first, and then I read the rest of Fellowship. I finished up Fellowship on the way home from my grandmother's house, and then I started reading The Two Towers. So in a way, I read both of them within the year. I mean within a month. And if I can do that, then I should be able to read like It or The Count of Monte Cristo, or especially books like It, where the Stephen King's writing style is very easy, in my opinion. Yeah, even when even if his early works have metaphors or similes are weird or something, or you can tell you can see the difference, or like he's an author that has so much information, unnecessary stuff in there that you feel like it's a waste of time. Like, that's the criticism I noticed for the 2011 2263, in that he doesn't have an editor, and no one edits his book because it's Stephen King. He's the king of horror. And but he still has a very easy to read writing style. Something, if I can read read Lord of the Rings, which is more flowery writing style, then I can reread a Stephen King book. And I did, and get through that within a month or two. And I did start reading rereading The Shining, because Emmy, I wish I knew if that's her actual channel name or not, or what she calls herself, but I don't remember off the top of my head. Emmy read The Shining on her own, not part of her book club with Caroline Marie Reads, but she read it on her own, because she is very fascinated by hotels and loves reading books about hotels. So she decided to read that one, and then it reminded me, oh, I want to reread that one. Oh, and that reminds me, another book I've reread is Salem's Lot. I reread that recently because the latest adaptation had come out. So it's like, I want to reread it. And I had meant to reread it back in either it was 2024 or 2023, where someone I watch, I don't know, it was someone like Olivia's Catastrophe or someone else, was doing a reading the Salem's Lot for the first time. And that can happen too, where, see, that's another thing I run into, where there are booktubers who I like and I enjoy, and they'll talk about a book that their favorite book, or a book they're currently reading for the first time, and I get excited, and all of a sudden I want to read that book even though I'm in the middle of other books. So that's something I struggle with as well. And sometimes it's a reread for me, but it's also something where it's something where, what was I gonna say? Oh, it's a situation where I'm reading other books by that. I'm in the middle of another book that the author has written. Like in this case, and Randy Ray mentioned this book, and probably I mentioned Katie Lumpston on her channel, Kate Books and Things, probably mentioned this, but Bleak House. All of a sudden, I wanted to start a reread of that, and you guys know I already bought another copy of it because I had the cloth bound, and I was like, those aren't easy to read because they're still hardback books, and so I have been wanting to reread that book, but then I'm in the middle of Katie's favorite Dickens novel, which is Our Mutual Friends. I'm like, oh, but I need to finish that one first. And then, in Randy Ray's video, he's talking about rereading, and all of a sudden, I'm like, well, you know what, let me just reread it instead of, and I'll come back to Our Mutual Friend later. That thought crossed my mind, but then I was feeling guilty again. So it's a bit of a cycle of me in rereading where, like, I want to reread, but there's always a reason why I'm like, oh, maybe I should wait and read this book first, or I have all these other books to read that I purchased. Um, it's kind of like I'm trying to figure out the balance between, because, I admit it's not like I'm gonna go, cold turkey and not buy books anymore. And I believe my opinion that I'm not as bad about, book buying as some people are. Because I, go use book shopping mostly nowadays, and then of course when I go to Books A Million, because of the, my mom and I discussing a budget for myself, I only get one book from Books A Million, or when I go to Barnes and Noble. And of course, I had a gift card from Barnes and Noble, and my mom, I was telling her about it, and she's like, well, why didn't you just use it all up? So I'm like, dang it. I should have done that. I should have thought about that myself and just done it. But I still was in the headspace of, I should only buy one book from there. And so, yeah, that's why I think, in my opinion, at least, I think I'm not as bad as some people. And my goal is to try to read those books that I purchase. I mean, some of them, yeah, I admit there are some here and there I wind up not being read. But most of them I try to, and my intention is to read all the books I buy. But anyway, so what I would like to do this year is try to focus more on rereading, as well as reading the books I've already purchased. Like, I already started, I do have it here, but on the floor I have a small little pile of books that I want to read next. I'm going to read next. I'm going to start my reread of Assassin's Apprentice before I get back into Flagship Trader series, because it's been so long. And part of me feels like with that trilogy, I was slightly influenced by what other people thought. And, like, my opinions weren't, it was hard for me to form my own opinion on that book. And not that any of those people are forced me, but it's just like, you hear these people talk about, and a book gets hype, and then you either rebel and are like, oh, I'm not gonna read that book because it's so popular, so I'm like, no, with the book. Or you can have the reaction of everybody loves it, and it's hard to determine if you're just happen to love it of your own free will, or like there's a little bit of influence in there. And I'm not trying to down anyone that says, oh, they love a popular book, but I'm sure a lot of people will have that thought of, how do we know you genuinely love it? How do we know you're not just going with the hype train? So that's another motivation for a good motivation for rereading is, if you happen to read books in your favorite genre that are super popular, you can determine that if you decide to reread it, it could be because at the time you didn't know if you loved it of your own free will, or if you only got caught up in the hype of it all. Or, you hated it at the time, and you're thinking, in the possibility of, oh, am I only hating on this book because I'm rebelling and that, you know, it's so popular, I don't want to like the popular thing. But anyway, so yeah, I just wanted to share those thoughts with you guys. My thoughts on rereading. I do think rereading is a good idea because then there's so much you can take in new with the story. You can, or things that you missed the first time, you can get those if you read a second time. And then on top of that, like if it's a book that you had different feeling, you might have different feelings later on in life, or even if you, or like it's a book where not only are you looking for things you missed, but you might find a whole new ideas or themes that you want to, or latch onto a different aspect of the story that you didn't latch onto before. Like you can focus on a different theme, or like for instance, you know, you read a book and it was all about the romance for you. You love the romance. You obsessed over the romance, and all of a sudden, and then you read a second time and it's you think about more of the friendship side of the plot, the friendships, and or the enemies plot, or people that are enemies, or like you were into, or back to romance, you were into a couple, and then as an, like you got into a couple as a teenager, and then as an adult or a young adult, I mean, or you got into a couple as a young adult, but then later in life you realize, okay, this maybe I shouldn't have liked this couple in the first place, or be more critical of them. Like I can still enjoy this couple, but maybe they're a little more toxic than I realized, or something. I've run into that. I had that experience where I, as a young reader, like with Jane Eyre, for instance, I was a big fan of Rochester and Jane, but then I started to think about, as a young adult and adult, I started realizing, you know, even though I still am intrigued by this, by Rochester and Jane and their coupling and everything, and Jane's love for him, I'm still looking at it in a different angle of like, well, they are toxic and he's not the best romantic partner for her. But, you know, I've discussed this before, that I do think there's, you know, a reason why she so easily fell in love with him. But anyway, this is not a video about Jane Eyre. It's just an example from, I'm giving an example. But yeah, so those are my thoughts on rereading. Do you guys reread? Do you struggle with wanting to reread, or or do you want to reread and can't bring yourself to do it because you have other books that you're interested that you haven't read yet? Or do you have no problem with rereading and reread all the time? I would love to know. I would love to know that in the comments below. I hope, whether it's a reread or something you've never read before, that you are enjoying it. And I will talk to y'all later. All right, bye.